Welcome to this Bible study series from the Church of God Seventh-day South Africa. We are now going to start a video series on the Lord's Supper, which is a very important, very serious event and something we must do on a regular basis, at least once a year. So we're going to look now at certain scriptures. But in this video, we're just going to deal with the question of when. When must we keep the Lord's Supper? And which days on the calendar, what should we do? What is the important thing to do? So let's start looking at that, because the question is that we must follow the commandments of God. We can't follow the commandments of men. We can't just choose and say we're going to use that day, we're going to get together that day, we're going to call it the Lord's Supper. And if we don't follow the instructions and the guidance that's in your Bible, then it becomes the commandments of men and not the commandments of God. So we have to be careful to do the right thing, the right symbolism, otherwise we do a dishonor to Almighty God and to His Son Jesus Christ. So let's look at Leviticus 23, and we're going to look at Numbers and Deuteronomy, and we're going to look at the history of the Lord's Supper. In Leviticus 23 verse 5, it tells us, on the 14th day of the first month at twilight is the Lord's Passover. Now, as you'll see later on, the Lord's Supper happened the evening before the day of the Lord's Passover. So that's why we're picking up the date and the specific day from here. So it says, in verse 5, on the 14th day of the first month at twilight is the Lord's Passover, and on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. So on the first day you have a holy convocation, so the Jews would keep that first day, that's day 15 of the first holy month in the Hebrew calendar. That would be another annual Sabbath. So the day before is the Passover, but it's not an annual Sabbath, but it's from 3 o'clock in the afternoon towards sundown. That's a twilight time, and in that time they would sacrifice the lambs at the temple, as we will see, and that's part of the law of Moses, the sacrificial system that was implemented until Jesus Christ came to give His own body as the final and ultimate sacrifice for us to understand our sin and how bad people are. But as far as timing is concerned, Leviticus 23 and verse 5 gives us the beginning, and it shows us when is the Passover, because the previous night is the Lord's Supper, and it's then once a year on that day. So on the 13th of the month, of the holy month, it's called Nisan. There's also another name which it is given in another chapter. I think it's Abib, and that, if you look in the Hebrew calendar, you can see when is the Passover. It's on the 14th of the holy month, the first holy month of the Hebrew calendar, and the evening before that, that is really the Lord's Supper, the special day. But let's look further on Numbers 9. If we look just next book chapter, or Numbers 9 verse 9, I just want to show you another time, because sometimes people miss the first opportunity. They are traveling somewhere and they don't make it, or something is wrong, or they just felt they couldn't make it, or they just feel that they were not ready. Maybe they've drifted too far away and they were working so hard and they missed that opportunity. Let's look at Numbers 9 and verse 9. Numbers 9 and verse 9. And the question came on, if people miss the Lord's Passover, what must they do? Are they going to have to wait another whole year? So let's look at Numbers 9 and verse 9. And it says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, If any one of you or your posterity is unclean because of a corpse, or is far away on a journey, he may still keep the Lord's Passover. So the Passover can only be kept at Jerusalem. That's the only place that can be kept. So if we look at verse 11, it says, On the 14th day of the second month, at twilight, they may keep it, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. So that was a time when the unleavened bread season starts. So at the Lord's Supper there would be unleavened bread. So that is the timing. If you miss the first one, you can just come a month later. So if the Passover is then a month later, a second opportunity, if you missed the first one, if you were away and you just could not make it, then there's the second month. You can now prepare more properly and make sure you are there in Jerusalem, and you can keep the Lord's Passover in the second month. And also for our purposes, the Lord's Supper is the day before. So on the second month, at the end of the 13th day of the second holy month, according to the Hebrew calendar, going into the 14th, which is the Passover day, but the previous evening, at the end of the 13th day, there's a second opportunity to keep the Lord's Supper. If you couldn't make it the first time, then you can have another Lord's Supper opportunity there a month later. So nobody have an excuse. If you miss the first one, there is a second one. You don't have to do the second one. If you've been at the first one, that's right, that's final. You've been there, you've taken the Lord's Supper. But if you missed it, if you were far away, you were not home or near the church or anything, then there is a second opportunity in the second month, the holy month in the Hebrew calendar. But let's look at further in Deuteronomy 16 and verse 16. Deuteronomy 16 and verse 16. Now as we turn to Deuteronomy 16 verse 16, I just want to explain that the Lord's Supper started from an event that happened actually 3 times a year. When the people come from far away and they get to their places where they've arranged to keep the festivals, they get into Jerusalem, then when they arrive at the home where they are going to stay, the owner of the home would then have a servant or somebody designated that as soon as people come in, they would wash their feet, they would set them down, and they would have a meal, because they've come a long journey, their feet are dirty with the sandals in the sand, and they are given wine and bread to give them energy again for the evening. So it was just a way of refreshing them, just just clean their feet, leave the dirty sandals at the door. Then they would have their feet washed, and they would then come and eat bread, just break bread, and they drink wine, and that would give them energy again for the rest of the evening. And that event became the Lord's Supper. Jesus Christ took that ceremony and He made it special. And He said, we must do this always. So now that event actually happened 3 times a year. If we look at Deuteronomy 16 verse 16, Deuteronomy 16 verse 16, it says there, 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in a place which He chooses. Now that place is Jerusalem. It has always been Jerusalem and it will always be Jerusalem. If anybody tells you that, oh, the Lord has chosen to place His name in some other place, He's speaking presumptuously. It is Jerusalem for these festivals where the proper place is. So it says 3 times a year, and this is to Jews, circumcised Jews abiding by the law of Moses. It says 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which He chooses, at the feast of unleavened bread, that's the Passover season, at the feast of weeks, that's about 50 days later, and at the feast of tabernacles, that's the end of the season, that's the final 7th festival, holy days that is in the law of Moses. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. So every man shall give as he is able. So according to the blessing of the Lord your God which He has given you. So they walked and they got to Jerusalem 3 times a year. And the ceremony of having their feet washed and eating bread and drinking wine just to refresh them and give them energy again, that happens 3 times a year. Although, as we'll see later on, it doesn't mean we keep the Lord's Supper, the proper supper with unleavened bread 3 times a year, because the unleavened bread situation was only at the first one in the first month. That's when the Feast of Unleavened Bread happened, and that's when they would have had unleavened bread with the wine. So that first one is very special and different. Jesus made it different than the other 2 opportunities. So we will look at this now. Let's turn to John 13. If we turn over to John 13. Now, the whole John 13 onward is dedicated to explain the events around the Lord's Supper. The book of John is clearly the last book, and it was written many years after the other gospel accounts, and he wrote for the wider church in all the Gentile areas, in Greece and in Rome and elsewhere. So John dedicates a lot, because the Lord's Supper is now the universal festival for the wider church out there. The uncircumcised people like me, we don't have to keep the law of Moses. We don't have to travel to Jerusalem. Obviously we can't make it. It's too far. It's maybe something one can do once in a lifetime. But that is not essential. But the Lord's Supper is essential, and we keep it on the day, the end of the 13th of the first holy month in the Hebrew calendar. But we see here that they went to Jerusalem 3 times a year, so there's 3 times a year when they would have had the opportunity to break bread and to drink wine. So, but that was not that was not unleavened bread in the other two opportunities. Also, that is not really before the Passover commemorating the Lord's death. So that is not so special as that very first one, which must be kept on the first month, and if you miss it, then you can come a month later. But here's another two opportunities to meet and fellowship for a special occasion, but it's not as sacred and special as that first one. But let's look at John 13. We're going to read the whole section here from verse 1 onward. I just want you to get the flow of events. John 13 verse 1 says, Now before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended, so supper has now ended, the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel and girded himself. So here is the foot washing ceremony, but that normally at the beginning people got their feet washed when they come in the door. But this was after the supper. This was now another special event that Jesus implemented and instituted for all Christians worldwide. So this happens after the supper. So the wine and the bread had already been eaten, and then this happened. So this is actually afterwards. That is the right time, and that's what we do. We have the wine and bread, and then afterwards is the foot washing ceremony. Let's look at verse 4. It says, He rose from supper and laid aside his garments and took a towel and girded himself. After that he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So this was a special thing that happened later on. It wasn't because people came in with dirty feet. This was a special one. This is what Jesus did, and he showed them humility. And verse 6 says, Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? And Jesus answered and said to him, What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. And Peter said to him, You shall never wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, said, If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Then Simon Peter said, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. And then Jesus said to him, He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. So we've talked about in the previous series on baptism. So baptism is full immersion. But when we come to the Lord's Supper, and that's why only baptized people really partakes of the Lord's Supper. Others can attend in the room next door and know and see and understand what's happening. But the actual ceremony, the partaking of the wine and bread and the washing of feet, after that, that's a special thing. And as we walk through life after baptism, we tend to pick up a bit of sin again. And that's why the washing of the feet shows that we have picked up a bit of sin again, but we are washing that off again. So that's what Jesus said here, and that's the symbolism of what he's doing. So Peter first didn't want to, but then he turned around and says, "No, okay, wash me complete." And then Jesus said to him, "He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you." For he knew who would betray him. Therefore he said, "You are not all clean." So when he had washed their feet, he taken his garments and sat down again. He said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." So Jesus tells us, verse 17, if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. So he said, he's given us an example, and we should follow that and do that. And that is something that happens at least once a year. At the Lord's Supper, at the end of day 13, at the beginning of day 14 of the first holy month in the Hebrew calendar. So that is essentially what we have to do. Now the other 2 days, as it says 3 times a year they would get together. The other 2 days we can use to get together again, but it's not as special and holy as that first one in the first month, or if you miss it in the second month. The other 2 times is not so special, but we can get together. It is 2 more opportunities. At the beginning of the evening before Pentecost and the evening before the start of the Feast of Tabernacles. Those are opportunities to get together, but at that point there was no unleavened bread. It was just normal bread, and they break the bread and had some wine, and that was a fellowship gathering, but it's not so special as that very first one in a year. So we just have 2 more opportunities according to the Bible to fellowship, to break bread and to drink wine and to fellowship as saints together. Now let's look at Acts 20. Some people use this scripture to say they can keep the Lord's Supper any Sunday, and from that it develops into Sunday worship, and then eventually don't keep the Sabbath anymore, which is the 7th day. But on the first day they want to keep the Lord's Supper every Sunday, every first day of the week. And then it develops into something else which is not supposed to do. In Acts 20 and verse 7, some use this to misunderstand and to say the Lord's Supper can happen every Sunday morning. But then they realize every Sunday is too much. It becomes blasé, it's like every Sunday. People then begin to take it for granted, and it's not so special anymore. So then they say, okay, no, we'll do it 4 times a year, and they choose any day, and then it becomes a commandment of men. Because if they choose any day, if the church just get together and they say, I think let's do it that Sunday, then it's not the commandment of God, then it's a commandment of men, and that's wrong. But let's look at Acts 20 and verse 7. Now Paul was traveling, and he was meeting with the saints wherever he came. And Acts 20 and verse 7 it says, let's just start from verse 6. It says, but we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. So the whole festival, 7 days, is now over, and they sail away. and in 5 days joined them at Troas, where we stayed 7 days. So this is 12 days after the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It says, now on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, which would have been Monday, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. Now some translations says, instead of the first day of the week, it says on the Sabbaths, plural. But that's referring to the counting, because from the Sabbath within the Feast of Unleavened Bread, they would count 7 Sabbaths, and any one of them is called the Sabbath. So they were busy counting down the Jewish Sabbaths to the 7th Sabbath, and then the day after that, that Monday, was Pentecost. So this was not Pentecost. This was still in the beginning, the counting down of the Sabbaths, the 7th Sabbath towards the 7th one, and then the day after that was Pentecost. So this was not Pentecost, this was 5 weeks towards Pentecost. Now you'll see that Paul talked about he wanted to get to Jerusalem for the Pentecost. But what we have here, the Jews had the Sabbath, and the Christians, early Christians in the first few hundred years also kept the Sabbath, and it's always been that way. But then you had also the other Gentile and heathen faiths that kept, that followed the sun god. So you had this weekend always for thousands of years. You have the Sabbath when the Jews and the early Christians kept holy, and then the day after the Sunday, the first day of the week, that's when the sun god people kept their day, and they gathered on that day. So you had the 2 days. So obviously the disciples just got together because the saints had that day off as well. So for thousands of years people worked 5 days. The Sabbath, the 7th day for the Jews and the Christians, and the next day for the sun god followers, Sunday. And there always was 2 days, so they were together because they had the opportunity to be together. Also, bread didn't come in nice slices today, sliced by machine into exact sizes. Bread was just a round bread which they baked, and still today in the Middle East they bake these round breads. So if people got together, then obviously they would sit down at table and they would break the bread. The guest would break the bread and then share the pieces of bread out, and they still do it today in the Middle East. So that was just a normal occurrence. When it says they break bread, don't see anything more into it. It doesn't say the Lord's Supper. It doesn't say the washing of the feet. It doesn't say anything there. There's nothing here that refers to any holy day in Leviticus or Deuteronomy. There's nothing there. You don't read something into it that is not there. People say, oh, they broke bread. Oh, that must be the Lord's Supper. No. They just broke bread as they break bread today in the Middle East. You can go there, you can travel there, and you can go and look and see that's what they do. They sat down around the table, they had the big round bread. When they're ready, they give thanks as we give thanks always before every meal. And then they broke the bread and they give it and they share the bread to others. That's just a normal meal. So we don't read anything into that. There's no proof that that was the Lord's Supper. So we can't go from there and say, oh, we're going to keep the Lord's Supper every Sunday. And then the next thing people say, oh, it's becoming too blasé, we must maybe keep it once a month. And then others say, it's still too much, we'll keep it every third month, so 4 times a year. And then it becomes simply the commandment of men. So we don't see anything more there except a normal meal on a Sunday when they had the opportunity to get together because it was the second day of a weekend. So nothing, don't read anything into that. So we really have the following opportunities. We have on the first holy month of the Hebrew calendar, that's around April, more or less April, May. In that first month, at the end of the 13th day of the first month, that is when the special, the sacred Lord's Supper happens. And that's, we have unleavened bread, we have wine. After the meal, we have the foot washing as Jesus did. We follow that and we wash each other's feet. Beyond that, if you miss that special holy day, that sacred one day in the year, we should all do that. Then there is a second month at the 13th, at the end of the 13th day of the second month, towards the 14th day of the second month, we can do that again. We don't have to. If everybody have been to the Lord's Supper on the first month, the second one is not necessary. If people miss the first one, then we'll have another one on the second day, but you don't go to both. Only one of them. The first one is the important one. If you miss it and you say, I can't wait till next year, but I was away, I couldn't make it this time, then in the second month there's another opportunity. If you miss that one, that's it. Then you're not really dedicating enough of your time and specific to that. So then it's not another opportunity for the one and only Lord's Supper when we have unleavened bread and wine and the foot washing of Jesus Christ. Beyond that, there's 3 times a year, so we can get together the evening before Pentecost, and we can get together the evening before the Feast of Tabernacles. When the Jews go and keep their festivals, we can get together, but then it's not with unleavened bread, and it's not the foot washing of Jesus Christ. Then it's just a special occasion when the saints get together and fellowship. And they can do it with a normal brown bread, which they break, the round bread, as they do at that time, and with wine. So that's just a special occasion, a gathering of the saints, but it's not the Lord's Supper as it is in the first holy month, which is very special. So that's concerning the timing. I hope you understand that. Read these verses and see it through again and think about it. I just wanted to clarify that exactly, and to also don't get mistaken by people who use Acts 20 verse 7 to say it's every Sunday, and then they break it down and says, no, okay, it's only 4 times a year, and then it becomes whenever they want to, and then it becomes a commandment of men and not from God. So we don't do that. Thank you for listening. In the next video we'll go more deeply into the Lord's Supper and what it means and how we perform that. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.